Welcome everyone to the CGR presented by the Department of Clinical Immunology and Rheumatology. Sjogren's syndrome, one disease, many faces. Sjogren's syndrome is a relatively recent disease among the conditions we treat. It was first described in 1930 and subsequently criteria for diagnosis are under evolution. So there are recent changes and most likely that things will become much better than now. It is a relatively common disease in the developed countries like West, Staph rheumatoid arthritis. However, this is the most underdiagnosed rheumatological autoimmune. We into underdiagnosis. And this disease can come to any department, practically every department in SGPK.
পিছনে সুইচটা ওই সুইচ বোর্ডটা ক্লিন করেছি দেখো কাপড়ের অবস্থা কত নোংরা ছিল সব প্লাগ গুলোতে নিচে থাকে তো ধুলো একদম ফাইন
I request you to please mute your mics. Please mute your mics. Thank you.
We are bringing this case series to demonstrate to everyone that Sjogren's syndrome typically presents to other departments, and most patients do not complain of dryness and dry mouth, which we associate with disease, and a high index of suspicion. Sometimes more extensive evaluation is necessary to diagnose this. And more importantly, treatments are improving. Conditions which were not treated until recently are showing response to treatment. New trials are being conducted. Better biomarkers are likely to come. So it is important that we look for this disease in the certain situation in any department. So I invite Rajas to present the first case.
Good morning, everyone. I'll start with my first case. This is a case of 53 years old female who presented to our OPD with chief complaint of joint pains for 3 years. The joint pains involved both large as well as small joints, was symmetrical in nature, associated with early morning stiffness of more than 30 minutes, and she was diagnosed outside as rheumatoid arthritis and was treated with NSAIDs as well as methotrexate. However, there was no history of photosensitivity, oral ulcers, skin rash, or Raynaud's phenomena. On further history, she gave history of grittiness in eyes for last 5 years, as well as history of dental caries and difficulty in eating dry food like biscuits. So based upon history, we made the provisional diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis and Sjogren's syndrome. On examination, oral cavity showed decreased salivary pool as well as presence of dental caries. Schirmer test was positive in both eyes, that is, it was 3 mm in right eye and 4 mm in left eye. Her skin was dry. Musculoskeletal examination as well as systemic examination was normal. Investigation showed HB of 12.2. TLC was 4800, but she had lymphopenia, that is, her absolute lymphocyte count was 960. Her ESR was raised. It was 42 millimeters in first hour. Creatinine and potassium both were normal. Autoantibody profile showed ANA 2+ fine speckled pattern. ENA was row 52 and 60, that is SSA positive. Complements were normal. RF screen was done. It showed rheumatoid factor of less than 10 and anti-CCP antibody was negative. So based upon these investigation as well as clinical history, we made the diagnosis of primary Sjogren's syndrome. This patient also underwent minor salivary gland biopsy, which shows focal lymphocytic sialoadenitis. So I'll describe in brief about American European Consensus Group Classification Criteria, which came in 2002. According to this criteria, to describe a patient having Sjogren's syndrome, we should have ocular symptoms, oral symptoms, ocular signs, oral signs, histopathology evidence of Sjogren's syndrome, and presence of autoantibodies, that is SSA and SSB. So according to this criteria, the patient is labeled as Sjogren if there is presence of 4 of the 6 criteria, which must include histopathology or autoantibodies, or presence of 3 of the 4 objective criteria. So we can see in our patient there was presence of ocular symptom, oral symptom, ocular sign, histopathology, and autoantibodies. Based upon this, she was labeled as Sjogren syndrome. Before labeling a patient as Sjogren, we need to rule out these conditions: any past history of head and neck radiation treatment, hepatitis C infection, acquired immune deficiency syndromes, pre-existing lymphoma, sarcoidosis, graft versus host disease, and current use of anticholinergic drugs. So in brief about dry eye, which is a very important component of patients with Sjogren syndrome. So various tests can be done to evaluate the dry eye in these patients. These could be Schirmer test, ocular stain, which can be either rose Bengal, Lisamine, or fluorescein stain, tear film breakup time, optic coherence tomography, and tear osmolarity. This image shows how we perform Schirmer test in the OPD. A Schirmer strip is inserted in the temporal side of the lower conjunctiva, and the length of the wetting strip is measured after 5 mm. The length of more than 10 mm is labeled as normal after 5 minutes, whereas less than 5 mm is suggestive of dry eye. In this patient, we can see that it is more than 10 mm, so it was normal. Now next is ocular staining score. This score is sum of fluorescein stain as well as Lisamine stain. Basically, fluorescein stain is used to stain cornea, whereas conjunctiva is stained using rose Bengal or Lisamine green stain. So to calculate this score, we do Lisamine green stain on both nasal as well as temporal aspect of conjunctiva, whereas fluorescein stain is used for staining cornea. And along with that, extra points are given if there is presence of patch of confluent staining, staining in pupillary area, or presence of one or more filament. So we can see that the total score of 6 is for Lisamine stain and 6 for fluorescein, giving the score of 12 for each eye. So currently we are using ACR EULAR 2016 classification criteria. According to this criteria, any patient with history of dryness symptom or systemic manifestation need to undergo evaluation to label him or her as primary Sjogren syndrome. So the various items included in this criteria are presence of minor salivary gland biopsy showing a focus score of 1 or more than 1 per 4 millimeter square, which gives a score of 3. Presence of anti-Rho or SSA antibody again gives a score of 3. Ocular staining score of 5 or more out of 12 in at least one eye. Schirmer test of 5 or less than 5 after 5 minutes in at least one eye, and unstimulated salivary flow of less than 0.1 ml per minute. To label a patient as Sjogren, a minimum score of 4 is required. So in our patient, there was presence of focus score of more than 1, presence of Rho antibody, and Schirmer test was positive in her. A very brief about how to treat Zika symptoms in this patient. It is very important to educate the patient about the various preventive measures, like they should use big glasses, they should regularly eat, they should regularly drink water along with having food. So if there is no response after preventive measure, we can use muscarinic agent, common being pilocarpine. For management of musculoskeletal system manifestation, it is done like we do it for other disease. We educate the patient and then advise them exercise, physiotherapy. Then we move on to next drug like methotrexate, and then depending upon disease severity, it can be upgraded to rituximab. So take home message for this case is, all the patients of Sjogren syndrome may or may not volunteer history of dryness of eye or mouth. Diagnosis require high index of suspicion. So every patient with inflammatory arthritis should be asked for Zika symptoms. It is easily confused with rheumatoid arthritis or minor organ lupus. Coming to our next case, this is a case of 50 years old female who presented in our OPD with pain and swelling in left parotid region, as we can see in this image, with 2 episodes of similar swelling in past 6 years involving bilateral parotid region, which resolved spontaneously. So this shows a very brief about the causes of parotid swelling. These could be either infectious in nature, common being viral, which include mumps, HIV, Epstein-Barr virus, or hepatitis C. Amongst the autoimmune cause, Sjogren is the most common cause. inflammatory in nature like IgG4 related disease, we need to rule out obstructive cause like sialolithiasis. Uncontrolled diabetes should be checked, and presence of granulomatous disease like sarcoidosis. It is very important to look for neoplastic cause like leukemia, lymphoma, and Warthin's tumor. So we had kept the possibility of Sjogren's syndrome, IgG4 related disease, sialolithiasis, sarcoidosis, and lymphoma in our patient. On further history, she gave history of dry mouth for 6 years, dental caries for 5 years, and fatigue for 5 years. Examination showed dental caries and decreased salivary pool in the oral cavity. Her Shermer test was normal, that is, it was 6 mm in right eye and 8 mm in left eye. So she had no symptoms of dryness of eye, no lymphadenopathy, and all the systemic examination was normal. So according to our investigation, her HP was 9.6, TLC of 4600 with absolute lymphocyte count of 960. Her ESR was raised, it was 75, creatinine was normal, protein and albumin both were done to look for hypergamma globulinemia, which could be a part of lymphoma, which was normal. Her HbA1c was 5.5. Autoantibody profile showed ANA 3 plus fine speckled. ENA showed Rho 52 and 60 as well as La was positive. Complements were normal and rheumatoid factor was negative. We also did her minor salivary gland biopsy, which showed a focus score of 1. A screening ultrasound was done in OPD, which showed change in homogeneous pattern as well as presence of hypoechoic areas. So how do we grade the salivary gland ultrasound? Grade 1 is normal homogeneous, grade 0 is normal homogeneous pattern. In grade 1, there is slight change in the homogeneity of the ultrasound of the gland. In grade 2, there is again increase in the homogeneity and also presence of very small hypoechoic areas. In grade 3, there can be presence of variable size of hypoechoic areas as well as presence of hypoechoic bands, whereas in grade 4 there is increase in the size of these hypoechoic areas, presence of multiple cystic lesions and presence of calcification. Since this patient had persistent parotid swelling which was recurrent in nature, so we decided to do her FNAC of the parotid gland, as the risk of persistent parotid swelling in this patient is 15 to 20%, and there is increased risk of lymphoma by 50 folds as compared to general population. So her FNAC showed absence of any malignant cell or cellular atypia. So the risk factor for lymphoma in patients with Sjogren's syndrome can be persistent parotid gland enlargement, presence of purpura, leukopenia, cryoglobulinemia, low complements level, that is low C4, presence of autoantibody, anti-Rho, anti-La, and ectopic germinal center formation in minor salivary gland. So take-home message for this case is recurrent parotitis can be initial manifestation of Sjogren's syndrome. We should always ask about dry eye and dry mouth in patient with recurrent parotitis. Now I hand over to Dr. Rupendra for next case.
Good morning, everyone. I'll directly start with our case. This was a 52-year-old female who presented with complaints of joint pain since 1 year, numbness of hands and feet since 8 months. There was history of dryness of eye and mouth for the last 4 months, and there was no history of any skin rash, photosensitivity, oral ulcers. There was no history of any skin thickening or Raynaud's, and there was no history of any muscle weakness. On examination, there were no enlarged salivary glands. Oral cavity showed dental caries with decreased salivary pool. Her Shermer's test was positive. Her CNS examination had higher functions were normal. There was decreased sensation, particularly of touch, vibration, and proprioception in a glove and stocking pattern. There was no any motor weakness, and her deep tendon reflexes were also absent. Her other systemic examination were within normal limits. On investigations, her hemoglobin was 12. She had a decreased she showed lymphopenia with an absolute lymphocyte count of 604. Her platelets were within normal limits. Her MCV was 82. OTPT and other routines were normal. Creatinine was 0.7. Her HbA1c was 5.1. On autoimmune profile, her ANA was positive with 3 plus fine speckled pattern. ENA showed Rho and La positivity. Her ESR was 70. On minor salivary gland biopsy, it shows focal lymphocytic sialadenitis. And on nerve conduction study, there was sensory axonal neuropathy involving upper limbs and lower limbs with decreased sensory nerve action potentials with normal compound muscle action potentials. Now coming to the classification criteria, as already discussed, in our patient, she had a positive for label salivary gland biopsy, anti-Rho positivity, and Shermer's were also positive. So she fulfilled the criteria of primary Sjogren syndrome, and her diagnosis was Sjogren syndrome with sensory axonal neuropathy. Now coming to the neurological involvement which is seen in Sjogren syndrome, this was a retrospective single center study from France which evaluated 82 patients of primary Sjogren syndrome with neurological involvement. And as in our previous cases, as we have already seen that neurological manifestations can precede SICA symptoms. In this study as well, SICA symptoms were the onset of Sjogren's was associated with presence of neurological involvement in nearly about 60% of patients, as 47 patients presented with neurological involvement at the onset itself, and subsequently about 35 patients developed during the course of Sjogren's. SICA symptoms as a presenting feature were present in 36 patients, while other manifestations like articular involvement, Raynaud's, cutaneous involvement were present in subsequently minor number of patients. Among the neurological manifestations, central nervous system manifestations can present in about 2/3 of patients, while peripheral nervous system can also be seen in about 2/3 of patients. Like in our patient, neuropathy in form of sensory neuropathy was present, which is present in significant number of patients, about nearly 45 to 50% of patients. Often, this was a single center study from Germany, which evaluated 148 patients with peripheral neuropathy along with weakness. And it was shown that when these patients with peripheral neuropathy were followed and were evaluated specifically for Sjogren syndrome, out of 148 patients, 44 patients were diagnosed to have Sjogren syndrome and fulfilled the classification criteria as well. Prior to the diagnosis of Sjogren in these 148 patients, in these 44 patients who were finally labeled as Sjogren's, they were priorly diagnosed as polyneuropathy of unknown significance or unknown reason in about 36% of patients. They were labeled as primary CIDP in 28%, paraproteinemia associated polyneuropathy in 10%, motor neuron disease in about 8%, GBS in about 8%, and multifocal motor neuropathy in about 8%. Among the nerve conduction studied at initial presentation in these patients or with Sjogren's, they can present with either of as a primary axonal neuropathy or a demyelinating changes or a mixed pattern on nerve conduction study. So the take-home message from this case was, in a patient with peripheral neuropathy, we should think about Sjogren syndrome. Always we have to evaluate these patients for dry mouth and dry eyes because they can give an objective evidence for Sjogren's, and these cases are often misdiagnosed initially and are usually treated symptomatically. Coming to our next case, she was a 45-year-old female who presented with inflammatory polyarthritis for 1 year, Raynaud's for 1 year, dry eyes and dry mouth for 6 months, dyspnea since 2 months, and weakness of hands since 2 weeks. There was no history of any puffy fingers or muscle weakness. There was no history of any skin rash, oral ulcers, or photosensitivity. There was no history of any skin thickening. On examination, her pulse rate was 100, blood pressure was 110/70. She had a normal saturation on room air, and her JVP was not raised. There were no any enlarged lymph nodes or parotid gland swelling. Respiratory system had bilateral chest infrascapular creps. CVS examination, per abdomen examination was normal. On CNS examination, she had bilateral decreased sensation in her ulnar nerve distribution with a weak hand grip of both the hands with a power of 3/5. Her oral cavity revealed a decreased salivary pool and her Shermer's test was also positive. On investigations, her hemoglobin was 10. Her TLC count was 7,600. Platelets were 3.5. And her OTPT were within normal limits. She had hypergammaglobulinemia. Creatinine was normal. And her electrolytes were also normal. On autoimmune profile, her ANA was positive with 3+ fine speckled pattern. ENA showed Rho positivity. ESR was 80. And her C4 was also low. And her MSA myositis specific autoantibodies were also negative. Her minor salivary gland biopsy showed a focus score of 1. Her chest CT, which was done, showed an NSIP pattern of interstitial lung disease. Her PFT was also suggestive of a restrictive pattern with an FVC of 65%. And her nerve conduction study was also showed bilateral ulnar, medial, and common peroneal axonal neuropathy. So on the basis of these combination of symptoms, a diagnosis of primary Sjogren's syndrome with mononeuritis multiplex and interstitial lung disease with non-specific interstitial pneumonitis was made. She was treated with prednisolone 1 mg per kg along with rituximab infusion, and subsequently on her follow-up, she is presently off steroids along with she's on HCQ and rituximab maintenance. No residual on the last follow-up, she had no residual sensory or any motor symptoms involving her hands, and her pulmonary symptoms are also improved on her last follow-up. Coming to the pulmonary manifestations which are seen in Sjogren's, along with interstitial lung disease which has been described, airway disease is also a significant component of disease. Cough, bronchial hyperresponsiveness, bronchiolitis, bronchiectasis, and pulmonary infections can significantly occur in these patients. Among the interstitial lung disease, NSIP is the most common pattern, followed by UIP, LIP, and organizing pneumonia. And if in a patient who presents with specifically LIP, that is lymphocytic interstitial pneumonitis, among the rheumatic diseases, it is most specifically associated with Sjogren's. So these patients need to be looked for Sjogren's. Other rare manifestations which can occur includes pulmonary hypertension, pulmonary embolism, lymphomas, amyloidosis. So the take-home message: consider Sjogren's syndrome in patients with interstitial lung disease with mononeuritis multiplex. Now I'll hand over the stage to Dr. Anu for further case.
Good morning, everyone. This case actually presented to us during last COVID breakdown. It was a teleconsultation. Her husband complained that she had acute onset of weakness of her lower limbs. It started suddenly in the morning. When she woke up, she couldn't move her limbs. She had no sensory involvement. She had no bladder or bowel involvement and no fever, loose stools, or trauma associated with this. She was taken to hospital, from where it was found to have low potassium, treated with potassium supplementation and improved. And after this, she was referred to immunology department. So she was admitted in our ward, and on direct questioning, she complained of fatigue for around 2 years. She had dry eyes and mouth for 1 year, with significant dental caries for 6 months, and Raynaud's phenomenon involving all her fingers for last 5 months. Examination revealed pallor. She had dental caries in multiple teeth. She had no parotid enlargement. Shermer's test was positive. Nervous system examination was, no abnormality was detected on nervous system examination. Investigation revealed hemoglobin of 9.4 gram per deciliter. There was no other cytopenias. ESR was normal. Her creatinine was normal, but she had hypokalemia with potassium of 3.1 milliequivalent per liter, and hypercalcemia, hypophosphatemia, and increased alkaline phosphatase. She had elevated globulin compared to albumin. Her transaminases levels were normal, and vitamin D3 was low, and TSH were normal, and HbA1c was 4.8. Urine examination showed a higher pH of 6.9, and protein was trace, RBC nil, but she had WBC of 8 to 10, and protein creatinine ratio was 0.95. And a venous blood gas analysis showed acidosis with a pH of 7.29 and a bicarb of 17. And anion gap was normal, it was 12.6. And immunological test revealed ANA 4+ fine speckle pattern, and both anti-Rho and anti-La was positive. The chest X-ray was normal, and X-ray abdomen was taken, and it showed no calculus. So based on this, we made a diagnosis of primary Sjogren syndrome with distal RTA causing hypokalemic paralysis and osteomalacia. The she was managed with potassium citrate syrup, calcium and vitamin D supplementation, hydroxychloroquine, and pilocarpine and eye drops for her Zika, and she was educated for dental hygiene and others. So the renal manifestation in Sjogren syndrome, and various studies have shown prevalence of 18 to 67%. The wide margin is because some studies included only complete manifestation, some even included incomplete RTA-like things. The most common among these is tubulointerstitial nephritis, which occurs in 75 to 80% of Sjogren syndrome patients. And these tubulointerstitial involvement can present as distal RTA, proximal RTA with Fanconi syndrome-like manifestation, acquired Gitelman or Bartter syndrome, or nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. Glomerulonephritis is less common, but it can occur as MPGN-like presentation, and most of the time glomerulonephritis presentation can occur as an overlap with other diseases or due to cryoglobulinemia. Distal RTA, as I have discussed, is the most common renal manifestation, and studies have shown that 5% of Sjogren syndrome present as. In 5% it is complete RTA, and in 25% it is incomplete RTA. It's most usually demonstrated by ammonium chloride loading test or frusemide fludrocortisone test, etc. So presentation of distal RTA can be hypokalemic periodic paralysis, nephrocalcinosis or nephrolithiasis, osteomalacia or metabolic bone disease. So this is a study which was done from India, a nephrology unit of from Hyderabad, where they have taken 149 patients of RTA, and it was shown that 1/3 of these patients had Sjogren syndrome, and among 52 patients of Sjogren's, 57.6% had distal RTA and remaining had proximal RTA. But among these 52 patients, only 44% complained of Zika symptoms. So these manifestations can even occur without any Zika symptoms. This is a study from neurology unit from Guwahati, India, where they have analyzed 56 patients of hypokalemic paralysis, and it was shown that most of them, 32 out of these 56, had mainly channelopathies, but 4 patients had renal tubular acidosis, and 1 of these patients was Sjogren syndrome. These are various studies which were published from India, and it was shown that in patients with hypokalemic paralysis, distal RTA is one of important cause among these patients with hypokalemic paralysis. So a female patient, if presents with hypokalemic paralysis and if they have evidence of distal RTA, it's always important to rule out Sjogren syndrome as a cause. So nephrocalcinosis is another manifestation. This is an Italian study of 65 patients where it was shown that 29% of patients had autoimmune disease. Out of this, 95% were Sjogren syndrome patients, with 5% including lupus and undifferentiated connective tissue disease. And in these patients of nephrocalcinosis, the most important stone was calcium phosphate stones. And if they have distal RTA, it's important to rule out Sjogren syndrome. So osteomalacia is another important manifestation of Sjogren's. It's more common with proximal RTA than distal RTA. In adult females with osteomalacia, if they present with these features, then it's important to rule out Sjogren syndrome. So my take-home message is, in a patient with hypokalemic paralysis and distal RTA, think of Sjogren's if the patient is female, and always take a history of dryness. And closing investigations like high globulins, lymphopenia should be looked for, and do anti-Rho and anti-Law. With this, I hand over to Dr. Rudrapan for further presentation.
So, good morning, everyone. Moving on, this 54-year-old male presented to us with a history of polyarthritis of a year's duration and dyspnea on exertion for the last 15 days. He also had a recent history of 5 blood transfusions in the past 15 days. And evaluated in hematology, he had been seen to have pancytopenia and a bone marrow showing a hypoplastic marrow. So when he was referred to us, we asked for a history of dry eyes and dry mouth, which was present. And we further evaluated for the polyarthritis. So RF was positive, anti-low antibodies were positive, and an ultrasound of the salivary gland showed grade 4 parotid gland changes in the bilateral parotids. So the issues with this patient, whether he had transfusion-dependent aplastic anemia, persistent polyarthritis, severe dry eyes and dry mouth on examination, and he had an inflammatory marker CRP that was sky high, 10 times the upper limit of normal at 5.9 milligrams per deciliter. He had already been treated with androgens and calcineurin inhibitors without much relief either in his arthritis or his aplastic anemia. So we decided to treat him with injection rituximab. He was given 500 mg, 2 doses, 15 days apart. And at 6 months, he came to us with resolution of the arthritis, resolution of the Zika symptoms, complete improvement of the parotid gland changes in the ultrasound. The pancytopenia was persistent and he had required transfusions for the last 6 months, but he was still given a second dose of rituximab, a maintenance dose of 500 mg. And at 4 years follow-up, his anemia has resolved and he is in complete remission for his disease. So I want to preface the next few slides by admitting that the trials of rituximab in Sjögren's syndrome have actually failed. But like all trials, these were actually directed towards regulatory approval. And this was a fairly large trial, but the primary endpoint was actually a 30% reduction in fatigue and dryness visual analog scale. If you ask clinicians, no one is using rituximab for either fatigue or dryness of the mouth. So this is where real world evidence comes in. And this large Italian cohort of 41 patients, they found that the ESS-DI score, which is a disease activity index with a high proportion of extragranular manifestations, actually improved consistently as compared to those with conventional DMARDs at almost 2 years of follow-up. So they further analyzed these patients for their dryness and fatigue, and both of them had decreased. And they had objective evidence of improvement in Schirmer's and unstimulated salivary flow rate. So this led to a reanalysis of these trials. And for this, they took an elaborate approach where they analyzed a large UK cohort and clustered these patients based on clinical symptoms. They found this cluster with dryness dominant with fatigue symptoms, and they validated these clusters into independent Norwegian cohorts. And they found these clusters consistently across all these cohorts. And based on this, they reanalyzed the practice RCT, and they found the same cluster of dryness predominant with fatigue, and found that these patients had increased B cell activation and increased globulin fraction. On analysis of this subgroup, it was seen that with rituximab, there was an improvement in dryness symptoms and improvement in the salivary flow rate. So there is a glaring lack of trials in extragranular phenomenon disease. And these are the patients with extragranular disease in whom we are using rituximab the most. So we thought we'd look at our own data. And this is our SGPGI data of 135 patients from the Department of Clinical Immunology. So looking at the age distribution of these patients, it was evident that at younger age groups, there seemed to be a greater proportion of extragranular manifestations at the time of diagnosis. We further quantified this using statistical analysis and found that at age less than 38 years, there was a significant association with extragranular manifestations at diagnosis. So out of these 135 patients, 50 of them, or 37%, actually presented with symptoms in the glandular domain at first visit, whereas 85 or 63% had a symptom in the extragranular domain at presentation. Now, the glandular domain symptoms were expected, Zika in 43 patients and 7 patients having parotitis. This piqued our interest in the extragranular manifestations, and we looked at time trends over the last 20 years. And while we saw that the number of patients diagnosed over the years has increased consistently with a peak in 2019 and an obvious drop off in 2020 and 2021 due to the COVID pandemic, the proportion of cases diagnosed with extragranular disease has actually been increasing through the years, starting from almost none in 2004, 2005, and increasing to a peak of around 80%, where 4 out of every 5 patients we diagnosed in 2019 actually had extragranular manifestations at presentation. And this has tapered off to around 50 to 60% in 2020 and 2021. So looking further at these extraglandular manifestations, so at first diagnosis, 35 of these patients had arthritis. And this is an expected bias. We are still a rheumatology unit, and we get referred a lot more patients with arthritis, and they get reclassified into a lot of diseases. But beyond that is where things get interesting. We have hypokalemic paralysis as the first presentation in 15 patients, 8 patients with purpura, 7 patients each with neuropathy and interstitial lung disease, 3 patients presenting with nephritis and fatigue, and 2 patients each with myositis, Raynaud syndrome, and thrombocytopenia, with a single patient of acute transverse myelitis. So we looked at the clinical characteristics of our cohort as compared to other described cohorts in literature, and we saw that the age at presentation across all the Asian cohorts is about a decade younger than Caucasian cohorts. The female to male ratio ranges from around 9:1 in France, 14:1 in our cohort, up to 28:1 in China. These patients generally have prolonged symptoms at presentation, and we have significantly lower Raynaud's in our cohort, obviously because of the difference in temperatures with Western cohorts, increased proportion of polyarthritis, and lower proportion of dry eyes and dry mouth. So our patients are less likely to complain of sicca or even parotitis as compared to other Western cohorts. ILD was seen in 16%, and a very high proportion of renal involvement, 26.6%, which is higher than all the other cohorts, with interstitial in 34 patients and glomerulonephritis in 2 patients. Hypokalemic paralysis in 19% of the cohort, neuropathy in 12%, and malignancy in only 2 patients, but this must be seen in the context that the duration of follow-up was low. And hypothyroidism was seen in a quarter of our patients, and this was primarily autoimmune hypothyroidism, and about a third of the patients in the Vellore cohort. Moving on to mode of diagnosis, there's a clear divide based on the time of these studies done. So the Vellore cohort and the French cohort was done prior to the 2016 classification criteria, where you needed a biopsy to diagnose or classify these patients with Sjogren's syndrome. And they have a high proportion of minor salivary gland biopsies at diagnosis. Whereas the Chinese cohort in our study was done, look at data, a lot of data that was post this classification criteria. And so we had a whole host of modes of diagnosis, including the gland biopsies, the clinical and serologic criteria, ultrasound of the salivary gland, and salivary gland scintigraphy. So it must be recognized that in 2015, ultrasound has been validated as a sensitive and specific for Sjogren's related parotid architecture changes, and the 2016 classification criteria, which has made it possible to classify Sjogren's syndrome without a minor salivary gland biopsy. So looking at the lab anomalies, our cohort had ANA positivity in 91% of patients, and this was similarly high in other cohorts described elsewhere. Rho positivity in around 70%, and La positivity in around 33%, which is again similar across cohorts, except for the high Rho numbers in China. We had low C4 in 10 patients, so 7.4%. The mean RF titers were quite high, 146.1. And this is the reason most of these patients can get misclassified as rheumatoid arthritis when they're really not. And 42 patients, or 31%, had lymphopenia, 18.5% had thrombocytopenia, and 42.9% had hypergammaglobulinemia. Now, all of these are important because they are risk factors for development of lymphoma at later disease. So if we move to the take-home messages, we would say that patients almost never complain of dry eyes and dry mouth at the time of presentation. Sjogren's syndrome presents often with extraglandular manifestations, and in patients with RTA, with osteomalacia, with interstitial nephritis, with sensory neuropathy and interstitial lung disease, we must take a history of dry eyes and dry mouth. We must check for autoantibodies, so anti-nuclear antibodies, anti-Rho antibodies, and anti-La antibodies, and do send these patients for a salivary gland ultrasound. It's a very convenient test. It takes less than a minute. It's non-invasive and it's cheap. It's convenient for the patient as well as for us. So just to summarize, Sjogren's syndrome is a multi-system disease. It can present with clinical manifestations in multiple domains, constitutional symptoms like fever and weight loss, thyroiditis, lymphadenopathy, interstitial nephritis, gynecological manifestations like dyspareunia and recurrent pregnancy loss due to anti-Rho positivity and congenital heart block, cutaneous manifestations like purpura and small vessel vasculitis, Raynaud's, arthritis and myositis, interstitial lung disease, autoimmune cholangitis and pancreatitis, peripheral neuropathy, which is predominantly sensory peripheral neuropathy, CNS manifestations like optic neuritis, cognitive disorders and spinal cord anomalies, and autonomic disorders like orthostatic hypotension and disorders of gastrointestinal motility. So if I may conclude in a lighter note with a metaphor, this is like the age-old fable of four people trying to identify the elephant by feeling different parts of it. Some of us similarly may say it's a neuropathy. Some of us may say it's interstitial lung disease. Some may say it's interstitial nephritis. You need someone to step in and look at the whole animal and identify the elephant in the room. That is Sjogren's syndrome. Thank you.